Hit it. It's Friday, August 6th, 2021, episode 143. I'm Patrick Ceresna.
And I'm Kevin Muir. This is our first of our interview-only summer specials, and it's our great pleasure to welcome to the show Marko Papic, partner and chief strategist at Clock Tower Group and author of the terrific new book, Geopolitical Alpha. We have a fascinating discussion about his framework for combining geopolitics and the markets, and more importantly, he answers that age-old question, how does moving from cold Canada to sunny Santa Monica help the investment process?
Okay, on to the interview.
It's our pleasure to welcome to the show Marko Papic from Clock Tower. He's a partner, chief strategist, and author of the great new book, Geopolitical Alpha. Marko, thanks for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure to be on your show, Kevin.
This is going to be a lot of fun because I don't know if I've ever admitted this to you, but I'm a little bit of a geopolitical skeptic.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
and we'll save it for later in the discussion. But I think you might have converted me with your book, and we're going to look forward to chatting about that and why you converted me. But first, let's learn a little bit about yourself, Marko. Why didn't you tell us how you came about becoming, a partner there at Clock Tower in the beautiful LA? Are you in? If I'm correct, you're in Santa Monica.
That is correct. Yeah, we're right on the beach in Santa Monica,
okay.
practically on the sand.
Yeah, and what the amazing part of this is that I know where you're moved from, and it's a huge uptick. And I did enjoy in the book where you threw that dig in on Quebec, where you said most critically, I had just spent the entire Quebec winter, all 6 months of it, reading at the BCA. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you do have a fascinating background.
Cool. Well, thank you, Kevin. Listen, I'm from Serbia, but I grew up in Iraq, Jordan, Switzerland, actually where I'm recording this from, British Columbia. Very importantly, went to school there, UBC, go Thunderbirds. And then went to Texas, had my first job there at Stratfor, which was a political risk consultancy. Then moved to Quebec for 8 years, where I worked at BCA Research. And then I moved to Santa Monica in 2019. So the way I put it is that I earned my beach with 8 years of l'hiver on Quebec.
Now, do you speak French? Like you're in Switzerland now. Are you in the French part?
Actually, when I lived here myself as a high school kid, yes, I lived in the French part in a town called Neuchâtel. And then my parents moved later to the Swiss-German part. So I learned French in Switzerland. And then, I was in Texas, British Columbia, and then came to Quebec. And I remember to this day, first time I'm ordering a glass of water, and the waiter doesn't understand me at all. And I was like, oh my goodness, my French has gotten so bad. And then my French friend who was with me, he was like, nah, your French is okay. It's just not Quebecois French. And I was like, oh. But having lived in Switzerland, I appreciate those differences in language.
I have a buddy that works on the sell side as a broker, and he's from Montreal, but he lives here in Toronto, but he goes back to Montreal. And I guess with all of the problems with youth unemployment in France, we're getting more and more Quebec or French people, Parisians and stuff coming to Montreal to work. And he was telling me he was there the other day, and some Parisian kid was taking their order. And they were, basically speaking Quebecois French, and he tried to give him the order, and eventually the guy didn't understand it, so they just went to English.
Well, that's something that a lot of Americans and I think Canadians from outside of Quebec don't understand. I mean, the culture is truly unique. The language is unique. As I said, I would compare it to Schweizerdeutsch, which is considerably different from the High German, and that's what makes Quebec such a unique and a beautiful place. And 8 years, and listen, 8 years spent there, I wouldn't change it for anything. Montreal is a macro hive. It truly is a macro gem. And I think a lot of the folks who are listening to your podcast probably have no idea that that's the case.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about your journey, because you start off at Stratfor, and so you go to school, and you're not. What do you take in school? Like, what are you studying?
I'm studying how to flip burgers.
Which really means political science. That's what I mean. I was studying, as many political science graduates do, to be a lawyer. Then decided not to do that. went to pursue a PhD in political science at University of Texas. Great program, had a lot of fun, learned a lot. But 2 years into it, I realized academia was not for me. And I was very lucky that down the street from University of Texas in Austin was Stratfor,
Right.
which is a political risk consultancy. So I crossed over there, tried to do both things at the same time, both the PhD and Stratfor. That was really, really difficult. Chose to just join the private sector. And that's where, while I was working in political risk, I realized very quickly that there was a lack of communication between the political world, the political analysis world, and the finance world.
Okay.
The two worlds didn't know how to talk to one another. Whenever investors, wanted to get insights about politics, they thought that the only way to get that insight was to talk to the shamans, to the witch doctors,
Right.
the former policymakers sitting in armchairs, puffing on some smoke, some cigars, and telling them in smoke-filled rooms what's really going on.
Right. Okay.
And on the other side, the political world, the political analysis world that was doing some really interesting research, didn't know how to apply it so that it was actually actionable for the investors. And the euro area crisis really sort of gave me this idea. That was a moment, I think, in history where politics and finance really clashed.
Converged or clashed. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, clashed and really merged.
And so you're sitting there at Stratfor, which up until this point had been mostly just politics, right? They had not kind of veered into the world of finance.
Yes, that's right. And there's a good reason for that. The financial industry is only like 18% of global GDP. So if you're starting a consultancy, why would you want to spend all this human capital on serving 18% of global GDP? You want to serve the other 82%, the corporate world.
Okay.
And so yeah, I mean, I was the Euro panelist when I joined. That was sort of what I was assigned to do. That was a very unglamorous desk in a political risk consultancy in 2007. I mean, think 2007, you have the global war against terror. You have U.S. troops in Iraq, Afghanistan. You have China integrating itself in the global supply chain. There's a lot of important questions. There's 99 questions, and Europe ain't one of them.
Right. I guess us as finance guys think it's fascinating, but the rest of the world isn't so fascinated by it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it really was only in 2009 and 10 when, we started sniffing out that there were going to be reverberations from the global financial crisis that were going to impact the European banking system and eventually the sovereign system. And at that point, being an investor and being schooled in economics and finance became a real hindrance. Because on paper, Europe was screwed. On paper, given the assumptions at the time, Greece, Italy, Portugal probably too, and definitely Spain, should have defaulted in some shape, way, or form. And we can argue whether they did that anyways. But look, the point is this should have gotten much worse. It didn't because of politics. Because the Euro area integrationist project had a political and a geopolitical logic that was more important than the lack of logic in the euro as a common currency area. And so politics and geopolitics began to really catalyze the solution to the crisis. And that was something that I realized sitting there at Stratfor trying to service our, financial industry clients. And at that point, I decided that would be my career. This sort of the marriage between political analysis and also the financial world. And unfortunately, there wasn't really an opportunity for me to do that at the firm I was at Stratfor. As I said, the management had decided 82% of global GDP was more important than the 18%. Totally understand that, have no problem with that. But I got really lucky because this gem of Montreal, of Canada, BCA Research, and when I say gem, I really mean that. It's a firm that's existed there in Canada since 1949. I got very lucky. Met the chief economist, Martin Barnes, who's a legend, of course, in the macro world. And he said, you should come over and, build the product here, this idea that you have. And so I did in 2012. So in 2011, I moved to Montreal with my family. At the time, just one kid. My wife is from Austin, by the way.
Oh, okay. So Montreal is very close in terms of sharing a lot of things. Like in terms of weather as well, like it's not that far off.
no, but I'm a good sales guy as well by convincing my Texan wife to move to, basically massive temperature differences. The first winter, it was quite something for her. And then there, I had to learn finance on the fly, Kevin. And this is one of the reasons why I appreciate someone like yourself. Someone who writes a blog that's, pretty much accessible to everyone. And not just yourself, but other people who make finance and macro thinking accessible to those who didn't necessarily study it in university and college.
Yeah.
So, like this, how did I do this in 6 months? How did I go from getting hired at BCA Research? And I was hired as a senior, person. Like, you're going to produce a strategy that will give buy and sell signals for securities based on your method. And I was sitting there and I was like, well, I got the methodology of geopolitical analysis, but I don't know what a security is. Okay, I wasn't that bad, but like pretty much,
Yeah, fair enough. Your background was politics. It wasn't finance.
Exactly. I have 4 degrees in political science and, I'm sitting there. And what I did, and this is where the Quebec winter really comes in handy. And also, of course, all my former colleagues and current friends from BCA Research and also Alpine Macro, a firm that spun out of BCA, they were extremely, that's what's great about Canada. The Canadian nice is real. There was this shared sense of success and failure. So they nurtured me, even though they could tell I didn't know what the heck I was doing when it came to the markets. And then I spent 6 months reading reports that BCA Research had penned over the past 60 years. And I go over this in one of the chapters of the book. I pull up a PDF. These are scanned pages from a 1964 report. And I've got on one screen the PDF open, and on the other screen is Investopedia. Shout out. They don't sponsor me, but they pretty much created my career. So I've got like a PDF of this really difficult, complicated report written by some macro demigod like Tony Beck. And I'm trying to figure out what the hell this means. And that's how I taught myself a lot of the macro thinking. Obviously, as I said, my colleagues helped. And my job was basically to integrate political analysis in a way that solved the ultimate question, which is the so what question.
Right.
And, those first 6 months were intense. And then I would say probably for the first 2 years that I was writing my product, I probably faked it till I made it, if you will. A lot of growing pains, a lot of feedback from clients that was extremely helpful, feedback from my colleagues. And by 2014-15, I would say that the product that I created at the firm eventually became the best-selling product, and it was just an amazing success. And my dear friend, Matt Gherkin, who I recruited to come and help me out, also from Stratfor, also background in academia, history, literature, he joined me, and he now runs the product. And I'm very proud of what I created and what still continues to be, I think, the best political and geopolitical analysis product in finance.
Well, that's a terrific story. Until I read your book, I didn't realize that BCA was the world's oldest independent macro research shop.
By a lot.
Yeah, by
decades.
And I had no idea as well that they had kept all the reports like that. And it's a fascinating way to go and learn finance, is to just go spend, as you say, 6 months putting yourself and immersing yourself in this. Did you notice, could you sense shifts in the way that people thought about markets as you went through these decades?
Of course. And that's probably, I get goosebumps as you ask me that question, because that's probably my favorite chapter in the book, where I go through this process. I really felt like an anthropologist or like a historian in the archives of some old civilization, because I'm reading these reports written by really incredible macro thinkers. And just to be clear here, BCA Research is a macro research firm,
right,
which is important for our conversation today and for the people listening to the podcast, because presumably they are, open to thinking about macro. Macro thinking was really shockingly novel in 1949 when the firm was started. To tell someone that they should choose stocks over bonds or particular stocks based on some macro forces was basically voodoo. People just didn't do this. They read the tape. They did bottom-up analysis in specific companies. That's how people invested money. So BCA research really adopted what we call today macro, and really was the only source of that kind of analysis anywhere in the world. Why was it in Montreal? Well, for those of you who don't know Canadian history, of course, Montreal was the principal city of Canada in terms of culture, economics, really everything, until the silent revolution in Quebec, where a lot of businesses kind of left. But there is this path dependency in that expertise. And we see path dependency a lot in our world, whether it's Silicon Valley's dominance, whether it's some random country doing really well in some random sport. Montreal retained this path dependency of macro expertise, and that's why it's such a wellspring of macro thinkers. A lot of people have come through the doors of BCA research, whether it's Francois Trahan, whether it's Polos, the current Bank of Canada.
Oh, I didn't realize he's a BCA alum. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. There's this incredible little kind of guild, if you will, of macro minds in the city. And I would argue that one of the reasons for that is that great education at a very cheap price allows people from all over the world who bring their macro perspective to come to Montreal and to be embedded in these almost, guild-like firms where you really learn through apprenticeship, making the charts on outdated computer systems. Like when I joined the firm, there was like a mailroom still. There was library stacks, where you could pull a book from 1880s and look at like railroad construction in Germany, that kind of stuff. And that's something that I think is really very unique to that part of the world. And I think it was also very useful that I wasn't on Wall Street when I joined finance, because I got that kind of a distant perspective, even though New York is, of course, 45-minute flight away. That distance helped. The winters helped, being able to really just study in the archives, almost like a monk. And so over the course of this period, yes, I definitely I could tell the different, ways of thinking. So pre-Volcker, there was a lot more emphasis on fiscal policy in the research.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that. So like you actually saw when you were reading it, like they were focused on fiscal, because for the next, 4 or 5 decades, nobody talked about fiscal.
Yes. So that's what's amazing, right? We take so many things for granted today. And then you can see the evolution of that in the research reports there. For example, like, you can see strategists at BCA Research pondering the questions we all ponder for the last 10 years. For example, where's inflation in the 60s? It's weird. Like, where is it? Why isn't it showing up? How big is the slack in the economy? Must be huge, and then boom, 70s show up. And what was interesting also in the 70s, this real, very nuanced view. Like, this isn't about oil price shocks. This isn't about OPEC. The inflationary pressures were building before the 70s due to the demand style policies. You can see that in the research at the firm. And so I had a great perspective, and I was probably very lucky that I was parachuted into finance from politics, because a lot of my colleagues, they weren't parachuted. They had been on the buy side, or they've been always on sell side. And so a lot of the norms and things we take for granted, they took as gospel. Whereas I would show up and say like, well, hold on a second. Monetary policy hasn't always been independent. That's relatively recent. Fiscal policy did once have primacy. These pendulum swings do swing. And so we got to produce some really extraordinary research. And I definitely learned a ton in my time in Montreal from my colleagues.
I guess it's a little bit of being in the right place at the right time. The fact that you were parachuted in here without any preconceived notions let you be open to new ideas.
Oh, I'm extremely fortunate because of that. Yes.
Yeah.
And also having, I think, again, path dependency is, you can call it luck, you can call it fortune, but there's this definite path dependency in my career, and it has to do with the fact that the Euro area crisis was such a formative moment, I think, for macro and for geopolitics and for political analysis. And a lot of the concepts I've introduced into finance that I'm now seeing in investment bank sell side reports being quoted and being used, a lot of the frameworks and methods I've used really come from just being fortunate enough to be in this sort of post 2008 great financial crisis moment where politics is starting to reassert its dominance. And look, if I was a great political scientist, like if I was really good at political science, I would have never left academia, right? So, like the other fortunate thing here is that I was kind of a crappy academic. I just didn't want to write academic research, and I wanted to be more hands-on. And so I guess there's numerous ways in which I got lucky.
I always kind of picture politics more. You guys arguing about the shadows on the wall and John and Rousseau and stuff like that in terms of actual, let's just say, applicable like real life applications. Like, are there lots of people in political science that make a living doing that, or is it just only academics?
Well, the problem with political science is the problem with economics, which is that it's an epistemic community that's so far up its own butt, it's eating breakfast twice. And I apologize for the image, but this is the problem with academia, right? I mean, ultimately, and this is why I was a terrible academic. I just wasn't going to play by the quote unquote rules, so I can get a quote unquote good job in some Southeast West Alabama state.
Right.
What I'm really saying is that it's not that there aren't tools that are useful, Kevin. It's that the questions being asked are being asked in order to reinforce the discipline. This is kind of the Kuhnian paradigm defense. So you're basically being steered as a graduate student to write about stuff that's like really like irrelevant to the sort of the rest of humanity. But it doesn't mean that political science is just about shadows on the wall. I mean, there are actual tools and frameworks in political science that are highly applicable to finance. And in my book, I would say that probably about 30% of the tools and frameworks I use do come from my, political science professors. So something like the median voter theory.
Right. Something I had never heard of. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn that there was actually something that you could use that had real life examples of how you could use it in finance.
The funny thing about it, Kevin, is it's kind of discredited in political science academia. That's the hilarious thing.
Okay, well, why don't you save it? We'll talk about that when we get to that section in the book. Why don't you just finish off your career? So you're at BCA. Eventually you go off and you join Clock Tower. And for those who don't know Clock Tower is very famous, and your boss is one of the legends in the business. Why don't you just walk us through how you end up there and how you leave the beautiful and very friendly Montreal for the I would argue probably more beautiful but definitely better weather of Santa Monica.
Well, listen, just to put a kind of pin on it, I do love the Quebec winter. It was a tough sell. I know I'm probably the only human on the planet for whom it was a tough sell to go to Santa Monica. But listen, Steve Drobny is a legend, and he can really sell kind of anything. So he came to me, I think, in 2017, and we knew some of the same people. A lot of the institutional investors that he works with were my clients at BC Research, and he had been looking for someone to kind of round out the team at Clock Tower to provide macro thinking, macro innovation. And so he came to me in 2017, and we had a great dinner, and he said, "Hey, listen, you should come join me." And I remember my initial reaction to him was, "I think you have the wrong person at BC Research. I think you probably mean my other colleagues. Let me give you their email address." I'm not, I'm the geopolitical and political guy. But I think what Steve had figured out, and for those of you who don't know him, I mean, his book Inside the House of Money is considered probably the book of macro hedge fund industry. And, he was always kind of at the forefront of the big turns in the industry. And I think he just figured out that the world was at a point where someone who can blend both politics and finance was needed. And so he told me, no, it's you. And I was like, okay, that's weird.
Well, that's fascinating. So you think that he was looking at the bigger picture, and he went out looking for somebody who could mix these two because he saw that the politics were going to become more and more important for financial decisions.
Well, one of the things that we do at Clock Tower is we talk a lot to macro hedge funds, whether it's because we're seeding them or it's because we're just keeping up our network. Using the network of macro mavens, as I call it, to inform our own views. So he talks to a lot of people, and he has a great pulse on the macro universe. And that's what he told me. He was like, look, Marko, like, I know you don't, you're not the greatest guy on valuations or on technicals. I get that. I understand you learned, finance like yesterday. But all the questions that everyone I talk to are about politics and geopolitics. So, that's where the informational arbitrage is right now.
Okay, so let's jump into your book. And I'm just going to say right off the hop, when over the years, I have been a geopolitical skeptic. And the reason that I am a geopolitical skeptic is for all the reasons you highlight in your book. And when I was sitting there, I was like, yes, I couldn't believe all the different times you were highlighting different individuals out there that are selling a false bill of goods when it comes to geopolitical analysis. And I would love to go through first, before we go any further, about talking about how you see the geopolitical world and how you use it. Let's talk about the people that are kind of going and selling these kind of false bill of goods. And I think that you have them into different categories, and you say the first one is the false expert. And why don't you tell us what the false expert is?
Well, I mean, the false expert is basically, the false expert is somebody that we think is expert because of the position they had in their career.
Okay.
And specifically what I mean here is that there's a lot of people who are kind of past expiration date. And I don't mean that because of age. I mean that they are no longer in the position where they're in the trenches. And so they try to cash out once they're out of that world. The problem is that it's not clear that they still have access to the information. They're no longer working for the government. They don't have security clearance. They don't have the ability to analyze the situation properly. The second issue is that it's not clear that they ever had that ability.
Right.
And not because of any fault of their own. They were just part of the forest. They were a tree in a forest. They weren't kind of looking at the entire forest itself. And that's something that I always ask people, like, why are you obsessed about listening to what the former Undersecretary for Eurasian Affairs from the State Department has to say? Like, why do you care? Would you talk to a Formula One driver about how the engine works? I mean, don't get me wrong. Formula One drivers are obviously professionals. They understand much more mechanics and engineering of the engine than a regular driver. But you would want to talk to the engineer.
Right.
The driver's the driver. Like, they'll tell you how to take different, turns. They're not there to tell you how the engine works. And that's really the first thing that I focus in the book. There is, and I noticed this when I started working in finance, there's this obsession with sources, with intelligence, with insights. And the problem with that is, one, the person you're talking to is not necessarily useful anymore in that capacity. They're not actually researching. They're not looking at polls. They're not thinking about the median voter. They're not thinking about constraints. They're not thinking about a whole slew of things. They're retired. And the second issue is that even if they give you an interesting insight, the problem is that it's only one data point. It's not actually statistically significant. It's only one data point. When intelligence agencies use sources, they create a mosaic. They have a mosaic of information and human intelligence. And you talking to one expert or two or three or even 10 does not come even close to how intelligence agencies actually use sources. So we need a different model, one that's based on analysis and thinking about the material constraints, not these false experts.
Right.
The other kind of a false expert is myself. And what I mean by that, and there's this funny part in the book where I talk about a buddy of mine. He quit Stratfor and he went to sell point of sales devices. Like, he was in a completely different industry. He joined tech industry in Austin, burgeoning. And he was called up by a radio show to talk about Libya 3 years after he had quit his job.
Yeah, by the BBC, nonetheless. Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, the great mind, really smart guy loves to do a joke, very practical joker. So he took the call and made a call about Libya, said basically nothing in a very profound way, though. And that went out to, 200 million listeners around the world. And so that's something that I also say. I mean, look, I was on TV, Kevin. I was on CNN. I was on BBC, and I was on CNBC, and I was on Bloomberg when I was like 27 years old. I didn't know what the hell I was saying, and so that's something that we also have to understand. People who are in the media and the news aren't necessarily there because they're necessarily really smart or they have insights. They're there to fill up the time and to provide entertainment in some way, shape, or form. And that's what I mean by false experts.
Right. And then there's other guys like the insider. What would be an example of an insider that people, think has all the answers, but they end up not?
Well, that's someone who can connect you to the current people in power. So I give the example of 2017, where at one of Steve Drobny's events, I wasn't part of Clock Tower yet, but he invited me to one of these really great events. They had someone who was basically extremely close to President Trump. I mean, we're talking speed dial. He could put you in touch with President Trump right there and in that moment. And I had the thesis in 2017 that tax cuts would happen. High conviction view. We would have pro-cyclical fiscal stimulus at the end of the economic cycle, with all the sort of investment implications that would flow out of that. A very high conviction view. And it was very important to my view because I also thought that China would deleverage. And so this was an important part of my kind of global asset allocation at the time in late 2017, mid 2017. And I was very disappointed because this insider gives a talk and I go up to them and I say, hey, look, I think tax cuts are going to happen. And the answer is no way. There's no way that President Trump is going to add more debt to our economy. The Tea Party kind of line.
Right.
Like, no way this happens. And I go home and I was very desperate. I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I went back to my team, to my colleague, Matt Gerke. I was like, listen, Matt, man, we got to rewrite everything, dude. Like, and then he was like, but he's just one guy. Isn't our method the opposite of that? And I was like, yeah, that's right. Like, what are we doing? He is just one guy. And we doubled down on our view, which was obviously right. And so the point here is that insiders sell access to people in power. But the point is that people in power themselves are traveling with events. They're like water going down the hill. Water is looking for the path of least resistance between the material constraints of the landscape. And that's how we as investors have to start thinking about politics. One insider can tell you whatever they think they know about President Trump or Chancellor Merkel. But the fundamental reality is that those people will ultimately respond not to their preferences, but to the material reality around them. And so that insider ended up being extremely wrong. And then, of course, there's so many other examples of insiders being wrong. The entire Argentina investment case in 2019 was built basically upon one consultancy that had very good connections in Argentina, and that was basically pumping the hedge fund universe with this thesis that, Macri was going to win the election, that everything was going to be good, and there wasn't going to be any problems in the country. And obviously there was this huge stampede, one-sided into Argentinian assets that ended up ignoring the reality on the ground, which is that the good old misery index, right, unemployment plus inflation, nothing fancy, was going through the roof. And no government was going to survive that kind of a negative macro context.
And I guess, Marko, this is what I love about your book, because I guess to some extent over the years of watching geopolitical analysis, I wouldn't say I've been burned, but I've come to the realization that too often the more sensationalist the story and the more that this seems like such a great idea on the geopolitical side, it just ends up being a dud. And I came to for me, the way I dealt with it was saying, well, you know what? Actual economics matter way more than politics. And yes, occasionally at the margin, the politics will matter more than economics. But usually at the end of the day, I'd rather know what the central bank is going to do, or I'd rather know about fiscal policy would do. And so for me, I kind of have just tuned it out. Now, what I loved about your book was that you've taught me that I shouldn't tune it out, but I should take another approach when I'm thinking about geopolitics. And you've kind of alluded to it in a couple times when you've hinted about the real world constraints. Why don't you tell us how you think about geopolitics and how you marry those real life constraints with your financial forecasts?
Yeah, so when you talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy, to me, that's just politics. That's all I hear. And so it's just policymakers in position of power making decisions. And to me, the way those decisions are made is based on constraints, material world constraints. What is a constraint? Well, think about your own life. Let's say that your dream car is a Bentley Coupe GT. And let's say that you can afford one. So you go out and buy it. So let's say that you only looked at your finances, your budget. Like a monthly payment for a Bentley Coupe GT, is a lot, but you can probably afford it. But then there are other constraints in your life. For example, you might be married. Your spouse may not approve of a $4,000 or $5,000 monthly payment for a car that seats really only two people and maybe a little bit of room in the back. So your constraints are ultimately going to determine the outcome in your life or in this particular decision better than your preferences. Kevin Muir's favorite car is a Bentley Coupe GT. Does he own one? No. Therefore, his preferences are non-diagnostic. What you want is not necessarily what's going to happen. And so when we think about policymakers, your point about sensationalism usually plays upon preferences. Oh, you want to know what Donald Trump is going to do? Read his book. The Art of the Deal. That's where you will find out what he will do. Wrong, completely false. He is going to ultimately do what the constraints allow him to do. Those constraints sometimes can be financial. So there are cases where policymakers have to respond to market incentives, especially in emerging markets. You might have an election that puts a left-wing leader into power. Those are actually often buy signals because the market has probably rioted before or after the election. And so those leftist or populist or anti-establishment leaders end up having to do what they have to do because they don't borrow in their own currency. They don't have a reserve currency. They have current account deficits. They have to be financed, blah, 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 blah. So markets can be a powerful constraint on policymakers. But sometimes it's politics. Sometimes policymakers have to respond to the median voter that demands a certain type of a policy. And then it's up to an investor to sniff out where that median voter sits using polling, using data, using knowledge of the history of the country, the sort of the zeitgeist, the political zeitgeist of the moment. The point here is that there is a multitude of material constraints that impact policymakers in their decisions. They're economic, they're financial, they're structural, they're demographic, they're political. And yes, sometimes they're also geopolitical in the sort of a grand sense of geography and geopolitical imperatives. But these can be measured, they can be analyzed, they can be put into a net assessment, thus giving us a good sense of where policy is going to go. And I think the best way to kind of explain this is to use perhaps a contemporary example that is on everyone's mind. I would refer the listeners to one of your blog posts, by the way, Kevin. You recently wrote about AOC during Jay Powell's testimony, right?
Right. Yep.
That was an example of political analysis that I would have conducted, because what you showcase there is this generational divide in America, and AOC representing sort of the millennials and Generation Z, and she's basically saying, and correct me again if I'm wrong, it's your blog post, but you're basically pointing out that AOC is telling Jay Powell, look, in the past, we didn't have inflation. So why should we think that it's going to happen this time if we're a little unorthodox?
Right.
And this is a really critical issue right now, Kevin, because I've talked to several hedge fund managers who have a view that the Fed will be more orthodox than we think because ultimately inflation is painful for the median voter. And I've heard this argument a lot. People push back on my view of unorthodoxy. They say, well, Marko, they're ultimately going to be more orthodox than you think because inflation is bad for poor people. But that puts the cart before the horse. Policies that generate inflation are extremely good for poor people. Don't tell me differently. Yeah, maybe in the long term, there's obviously issues such as inflation. But in the near term, the reason populists pursue policies that generate nominal GDP growth is because the median voter demands them.
Right.
So I think that we need to be very careful in sort of pointing out that price inflation in the past has hurt the average American, and that because of that, there will be this popular political push against inflationary unorthodox policies. That may be the case 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, but the reality is that the policies being pursued right now are ultimately going to be unorthodox because the political pressures are there in favor of those. What do I mean by that? I mean that by the end of this year, we're likely going to get another $3.5 trillion of fiscal policy, of fiscal stimulus. That will mean that in 18 months since the COVID recession, we have pumped about $9 trillion worth of stimulus. That's more than 10 times the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that was passed in March of 2009, the $850 billion deal that was passed along party lines after the great financial recession. So we had $850 billion last cycle after the greatest financial crisis that led to household deleveraging, balance sheet recession, secular stagnation. We had $850 billion. Now we're going to end up somewhere between 8 and 9 trillion. And so that is not an outcome that reveals the preferences of policymakers. That's not an outcome that we have because the Democrats are in charge. That is an outcome that reveals the preferences of the ultimate political constraint, which is the median voter.
Ah, okay. And this is your MVT theory. This is, and this was originally from actual academia politics, right?
Well, I mean, the median voter theory is a way to think about this. Median voter theory is just a sort of call it a conceptual crutch. What median voter theory argues is that there is a median voter on every important issue. Okay, that's an assumption. The second assumption is that policymakers try to get closer to that median voter in order to win an election. Now, they might need to lose an election or two before they realize where the median voter is. But eventually, if you want to be successful, you will try to approximate the preference of the median voter. Now, my thesis, even before COVID, and this is one of the reasons, by the way, that I was so bullish after the COVID recession, I was maniacally bullish in March of 2020. And the reason I was maniacally bullish is that I've been arguing since 2014-15 that the pendulum was swinging in the United States in particular away from laissez-faire policies.
Okay.
And towards something else. And how do we, and what that meant was that when the next recession hit, the policymaker response was going to always be gargantuan. It's not because of COVID that we have 10x the fiscal response in the US. And by the way, note that other countries in the world have not adopted that. Canada has, interestingly, but for the most part, Europe, Japan, and especially China did not respond with the kind of helicopter money stimulus that the US did. What's happening in the US is that the median voter has moved to the left when it comes to economic policy, not social issues, economic policies, more than in any other country in the world. And that was my framework even before COVID hit. So when COVID recession hit, naturally my sort of forecast was, well, we're about to get a deluge of fiscal stimulus. And I still believe that today. I think the reconciliation bill will pass Congress, and Biden will get one more big kind of stimulus that I think the market has priced out over the past several months. Okay. There's this sort of loss of confidence in the Biden administration to be able to produce any more fiscal stimulus. I think that's a mistake. That's missing the political zeitgeist. Now, you might say, well, Marko, how did you get to this conclusion? I mean, how can you tell where the median voter is? Well, we have some great polling on the American median voter. For example, you can take a look at a percent of respondents for whom reducing the budget deficit is a top priority. And this is pure research. It goes back to 2000. The data is great. And it shows that we're right now at the lowest level since 2004. So barely 40% of Americans believe that reducing the budget deficit is a top priority, even though the budget deficit itself has never been higher.
Right.
Now, this is a sharp contrast from 2012 and 13, when 70% of Americans had the budget deficit as a top priority, which of course motivated the Tea Party, but also Barack Obama, to put in the sequester and this long period of austerity, which contributed to the secular stagnation of the last thesis. Now, that's not the only polling I would look at. There's another great poll going back to the 70s, where Americans are asked whether they prefer small government providing fewer services or big government providing more services. As you would imagine, the net preference has, for the past 50 years, been for a small government. But that's now collapsed. And not because of Biden. It's really collapsed with Donald Trump's election. And what that tells you is that Republican voters and independent voters who have tended to be quite fiscally conservative have now moved over to that left-wing side of economics, which is why you should continue to bet and expect more profligacy, and I would argue also more monetary policy unorthodoxy as well.
So that's fascinating. So we on Wall Street or in the markets sit there and we just listen to the Stanley, Druckenmillers and all of the people that have spent the last decades, living under this one playbook. And you're arguing that the playbook has changed and we're not, in terms of the markets, we're not realizing that the political landscape is completely different today versus, let's just say, a decade ago.
Well, I mean, I've read, Druckenmiller's interview with Goldman Sachs, where he talked about this. I mean, I think he's actually fully on board with what I'm talking about. He just doesn't like it.
Oh, okay. So I would actually completely agree with you, Marko, that what Druckenmiller says he wants done and what he does with his portfolio are two different things.
Well, and there's that. And I mean, he actually was honest about that. I think at the beginning of that interview, he said that, look, I'm very nimble, blah, blah, blah. But look, my point is that he's making a normative point. He's basically saying, like, all this stuff that Marko's saying is happening is just terrible. And my point, and my point is,
I just don't like it.
I just don't like it. And this is going to lead to, inflationary overshoots and this and that. Right. And my argument is just like, well, my job is to just forecast what is going to happen. Like whether I like it or not is quite frankly, nobody pays me for that. And it's irrelevant.
So are you, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but are you fascinated watching the market swing from being like, let's face it, hugely bullish about how much we're going to have printing forever and this is going to mean everything's going to go to the moon and everyone thinks that we're going to have inflation and you got to put on all these trades, and then it seems like we run from that side of the boat completely to the other side of the boat now, where there's no way we're going to have a big budget, a big infrastructure bill, we're done, you own bonds. Like you as sitting there kind of trying to maintain a little bit more objectivity, you must just be fascinated by how, us in the finance market, world are so maniacal almost.
Well, I think there's a reason for that. I think most investors are trained to read FOMC statements. And the issue with that is that monetary policymakers, like central bankers, have bent over backwards to give us information and forward guidance and look, here's what we're going to do like 3 years from now.
Right.
Here's some dots. And then we don't believe them and we try to kind of read the tea leaves and blah, blah, blah. The problem with fiscal policy, Kevin, is that it's the exact opposite. There is negotiations through the press. You understand? So like a moderate senator in the Democratic Party is going to say no, 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 no until he gets something or she gets something that they want.
Right.
So take, for example, the senator from West Virginia, Manchin, who's, of course, a pivotal, marginal Democratic senator. He's now being asked to both sign on to about $1 trillion worth more of infrastructure spending bipartisan and another $3.5 billion reconciliation bill that's going to go along party lines. I mean, what is he going to get from the Biden administration? I don't know. Maybe he's going to get a deep water port in West Virginia. Yes, I'm aware of American geography. Let me repeat that again. He may get a deep water port in West Virginia for his troubles. I don't know. But the point is that he is going to try to be as intransigent as he can get to bid up his price. This happens all the time. This happened during the euro area negotiations between Greece and Germany. Like the bravado that's in the press is designed to create this game of chicken so that one side blinks in the negotiations. And that's the difference between fiscal and monetary policy. Monetary policy, policymakers are bending themselves backwards to try to give you as the investor insight into the future. When it comes to fiscal policy, it's much more political. It's much more game theoretical. They're not going to tell you what they're going to do. So investors lose hope. And so the analog that I have for what's happening right now in the markets would be 2017. I mean, I traveled from Seattle to Stockholm to Singapore. I traveled like crazy in 2017. I was on the south side. I spent 130 days on the road. And I think that maybe 2 out of 150 clients I saw thought the tax cuts were going to happen in 2017. It was. Now a lot of listeners listening to this, Monday morning quarterbacking will say to themselves, "No, I knew that was going to happen." No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I was in your office and you said to me, "No way, Marko. The Tea Party. The Tea Party will not let budget deficits blow up." Or maybe you were a liberal and you said, "No way, Trump is an idiot. No way he's going to get that through Congress. He's incompetent." I don't care what your excuse was, but you didn't believe it. And this shows up in the 10-year. The 10-year, basically, the yield went through the roof after Donald Trump was elected. There was this expectation that a populist president would target nominal GDP growth, and therefore the 10-year sold off. And then it kind of settled into this kind of morose stasis in the spring and the fall. In the spring and the summer of 2017, the 10-year stopped, the yield stopped basically going higher. Why? Because after the Obamacare repeal failed, most investors assumed the Republicans can't get anything done. And that was a mistake. They completely misread the median voter. They completely misread the political zeitgeist. You had a populist president who was going to use his bully pulpit to get the Republicans, including the Tea Party. We just spent 8 years, basically burning down Washington, D.C. to get Obama to reduce the budget deficit. He managed to get everyone in the Republican Party on board to blow out the budget deficit. So that is my analog for today. Investors are overly analyzing the ins and outs, the conversations on the Hill, and they're missing the big picture. The political zeitgeist is one where nobody cares about budget deficits. The zeitgeist is one where millennials and Gen Z doesn't know what inflation is. And baby boomers, maybe some are concerned, but not really. There hasn't been inflation in like 40 years. Nobody cares. We're going to blow out the budget deficit again. We're going to get another $3 trillion worth of fiscal policy. And I think that will restart the sell-off in the bond market, which, of course, has been astoundingly arrested. Now, I wouldn't say that fiscal policy is the only reason that the bond market has rallied. We can talk about the Delta variant. We can talk about the second derivative of growth. We can talk about Chinese deleveraging. There's other things in this macro soup. But the one that I probably have the greatest competence in, which is politics and fiscal policy, I think the market has massively miscalculated. And you can see this in infrastructure stocks. You can see that basically stocks that would perform well if an infrastructure plan was passed basically have given up all their gains since the Georgia Senate election. If you use that as a proxy for probability of an infrastructure bill, I would argue that maybe investors went from 70% to 10% in the last several weeks.
That's fascinating stuff. Listen, Marko, actually, I want to use your framework for you to cash some, to pour some salt on one of my trades that I like recently, and that is buying India. And you have a chapter in the book where you walk up through the constraints. And to be fair, when I wrote this one up, I said, I know that every kind of few years, the hedge funds get all excited about India and it's the new discovered market, and then they eventually disappoint. And in your book, you walk through why that disappointment occurs and what people should be on the lookout for. Could you update us on, do you still feel the same about India, and am I making a mistake?
So you know what? I'm going to let the listener buy the book and read the chapter. Okay. But here, I'm going to add something that's not in the book.
Okay.
So since COVID, we've had this extraordinary amount of fiscal policy. We have some really interesting macro trends, such as what I call the race to zero, which is the sustainability, green tech, massive amount of spending on electrification, on EVs. We have policies that make me a dollar bear on the cyclical horizon. So what I'm getting at is that I'm firmly in the reflation camp. Now, I'm playing this interregnum. I kind of saw it coming 2 months ago. Like, I'm comfortable with it. I don't have a problem. I just think it's an interregnum. It's like a mini intra-cyclical blip in the big cyclical theme, which is reflation. So the reason I would want to be bearish India is that India is the anti-reflation trade. And what I mean by that is that India will do well if commodities don't rally. India will do well if its imports are cheap. And that means energy, but it also means food. And my problem right now with India is that if I have the macro outlook for the next 5 years that I have, which is a dollar bear commodity bull, emerging market bull, but emerging markets that produce commodities, that export commodities, I'm not really an India bull in this case, almost no matter what Indian policymakers do. So that's the first issue. The macro context scares me. The second would be that I'm not sure that Indian policymakers are doing the structural reforms that they need to do. I think a lot of the reforms passed has been window dressing, and I think the Modi administration has kind of taken a wrong turn in a few directions over the past several years. For example, before COVID outbreak, there were protests in India against the national law that was passed. There's a lot of tensions rising in India even before the COVID recession. And then the third leg of my bearishness towards India would simply be that, after a deep recession, you usually see this bounce back in commodity prices that could be cyclical, as I think it is. I think it's going to be persistent. It could be temporary, as many who obviously don't believe in the reflation trade are betting. But there almost always is a commodity price increase. Even after the great financial crisis, we saw this, especially in food prices. And I worry that that's going to trickle to Indian politics over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
So one of my biggest political risks right now is not like a China-US clash, although obviously that's scary too. I think one of the biggest concerns I have is a repeat of the Arab Spring scenario in countries that have to be very sensitive to higher food prices. And of course, India is part of that.
That's fascinating. Speaking of China, could you give me any insights about what you think, is happening there? We just had the Xi government making the education stocks an arm of the government and turned it into the not-for-profit sector. We've had them clamping down on all sorts of technological issues. What do you think's happening there, and do you have any insights that you could offer?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of the reasons that I'm very happy to be a Clock Tower Group is that we have great coverage of China. We've been in China for many years. We have an office there. We work very closely with hedge fund managers in China. And as hedge fund managers anywhere else, they're not political, right? They're just trying to get the markets right. And so I love reading their insights and being able to tap that network. And for several months now, we've been hearing that income inequality is becoming a critical issue in China. And there's two reasons for this, Kevin, and they're very important for macro investors. One, China learned a completely different lesson from the great financial crisis relative to their American policymaker peers. American policymakers learned that they didn't stimulate enough. Chinese policymakers learned that they stimulated too much. And so since the COVID recession, China has done very little to support households, unlike the United States. You have this incredible alligator jaw chart when you look at household income growth in China and the US. US had this extraordinary situation where after a recession, household incomes grew. It's fascinating. Probably never happened in human history. And in China, they had, a household deleveraging. They are having a balance sheet recession in China. So households are hurting in China because of the decision by policymakers to not stimulate the way Americans did and to learn different lessons. The second thing that's happening in China, also kind of on a secular thesis, is that income inequality has basically risen due to development. And Chinese policymakers are starting to really worry about that. They're starting to worry about that because next year, you could argue, is their election year. Xi Jinping is supposed to extend his presidency for another 5-year term, which is breaking a norm, not necessarily a rule, but it's a norm. And the last thing that I think policymakers in China want is a middle class that feels that the quid pro quo between Chinese Communist Party and the middle classes in China is going to be broken. And that quid pro quo is that the Chinese Communist Party asks its middle class to accept the rule as long as they continue to deliver this middle class lifestyle, the China dream. And so I think that you should interpret almost every single policy decision in Beijing, whether it's on tutors, whether it's on internet stocks, in that prism. And the way we see it, the way we think about China is that China is abandoning the service sector model that they so enthusiastically wanted to follow, thanks to the American example. And what Chinese policymakers are saying is that the service sector model of the United States of America will lead to even greater income inequality issues. These internet giants, these internet companies are not good for, the growth of the middle class. It didn't help America. Why would it help us? So instead, they're pivoting to hard tech. And they call this hard tech versus soft tech. They're abandoning the soft tech approach, the service sector approach, and they're adopting a much more, Japanese, German approach of hard tech, of keeping their manufacturing employment at a relatively high level. And that is a really important pivot. It's something that Peter Thiel called before atoms versus bits. It's something that I've been sensing is happening in our economy globally, not just China, US as well, where we're coming to the end of software dominance, of tech dominance, for a number of different reasons. But in China, one of those reasons is that policymakers themselves are accelerating that pivot back towards atoms, back towards industrials, materials, energy, and away from tech and IT. And I think that fundamentally, they believe that it will help resolve income inequality better. But also, I think there's a geopolitical reasoning too, where Chinese policymakers just don't think that, a mobility app is going to matter in an eventual confrontation with the United States. What's going to matter are batteries, airplanes, like trains, airplanes, and automobiles, right? Like real stuff. That's going to matter. And whether you have a mobility app or a really cool payment system, like cool story, bro, but that's not going to put a missile into an aircraft carrier.
I would love to pick your brain, Marko, on an idea that I've had that I just don't know how to express it and to figure out how to make money off of it. But I've looked at this whole COVID unfold and seen the just-in-time inventories. But even more importantly than the just-in-time inventories is what's truly important in our current economy. And to me, it's chips, semiconductor chips. And this almost seems like the new oil to me. And when I'm thinking about if I was a U.S. president or a lawmaker, I would be making sure that we got this capability to come back home. And to me, it almost seems like an area of national security. Do you agree? And I would love to hear what you think about that. And is there any ways to play that?
Yeah, so I do agree. I've agreed on that view since 2019. But the irony of that is that as geopolitics gets included in supply chain discussions, producers are going to lose. I mean, if you're a Taiwanese semiconductor producer and suddenly America is forcing you to build a completely unnecessary, from your perspective as a producer, fab in Arizona for $20 billion, like that's not a good thing. You don't want to own that company.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I agree.
So what do you want to own? What do you want to own? Well, since 2019, my highest conviction view, this is like a secular thematic view, has been semiconductor capex plays. They're going to be absolutely essential. So these are firms that produce the machines that produce the semiconductors. So like if you're a producer, you need to buy a machine from a semiconductor capex company. There's, of course, one in Taiwan, in Japan. There's one in the Netherlands. There's a bunch in California. I don't know what my compliance rules are. I think I'm not supposed to
don't
give
worry.
stock
Don't no.
recommendations,
You can't give away all. You can't give it all away. All the secrets of.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah,
There's
fair
like
enough.
literally like 10 of these.
Okay.
But yeah. So this is one. But so I've had this thesis for 2 years. It's done reasonably well. But here's what I would say, Kevin. I do think we can become overly obsessed about semiconductors, though. And I mean, definitely we're going to have more semiconductors in the future, and definitely these capex plays will continue to do well. It's just that I would mention one thing. I do think that innovation going forward is going to be in the realm of atoms. And so I think that undervalued plays, especially industrials, especially in energy and materials, can outperform even semiconductors because the story is already somewhat priced in. I mean, like 5G and Internet of Things have driven semiconductor valuations pre-COVID.
Right.
Like we didn't need the pandemic for people to be excited about these plays. And I think that the real shift in innovation is going to actually move away from software and computers. There's still going to be innovation there. We're still going to need more. But the issue is that the real new technologies coming to the forefront are going to be in the realm of atoms. And this is because right now, policymakers are committing trillions of dollars of spending in what the Chinese called hard tech. And these are really the realm of EVs, batteries, quantum computing, agricultural technology, military technology. We're basically committing more money behind the green project than we've committed behind the Apollo program, the Manhattan Project, and the US interstate system combined. And that will lead to innovation in the realm that doesn't really have much to do with semiconductors. You're still going to need them for many of these. But really, we should start looking at the sectors that have been undervalued and left for dead. Whether that's autos, whether that's other transportation plays, infrastructure plays, materials, definitely energy stocks, definitely electronic vehicles and batteries. That's where a lot of the innovation is going to happen.
Okay, so Marko, one of the things that before we chatted, you mentioned that one thing I'd like people to take away from my book is that you can do this at home. And this geopolitics, why don't you walk us through how you think people should use your framework and how this could help their investing career?
Well, I just think that I wrote this book for this reason. I want the regular investor, whether it's a day trader or whether it's someone working in institutional investor, to understand that they don't need access to smoke-filled rooms to have a view on politics. Yes, politics is difficult to forecast. I mean, so are markets. Both are an art more than a science in both cases. Your probability of getting forecasts correct, even 60%, if you do that, you're doing great.
Right.
And because of that, we shouldn't think of politics as voodoo. I mean, heck, being a market strategist is voodoo just as much. So just calm down, take a deep breath, wash yourself of biases. That's really important. Don't think in the terms of should or should not, normative or moral terms. Just think in terms of material constraints that will force policymakers to take certain decisions. So if you're focusing on Brazil, as an example, an election is coming up. Lula looks like he's going to win. Are you going to short Brazil because the PT comes back to power and a leftist is president? Hell no. Think about the constraints that face Lula when he comes to power: the market, the current account deficits, the debt levels, all these reasons why he's actually going to adopt quite orthodox policies. And if I'm to be asked, he's probably going to be the best thing that ever happened to Brazil because he'll keep the leftist parties united. He'll cajole them, he'll push them, and he'll probably do actually more reforms than if Bolsonaro was in power. So that's how we should do analysis, by thinking about the constraints that face policymakers. It's not about trying to figure out what's in their head or reading some insight or talking to some high-priced, consultant. This isn't to say to not talk to consultants. If you have the means, of course, talk to them. But when you are sitting across a former diplomat or a former policymaker, ask them questions that try to gauge the material constraints facing policymakers. Use the method that I talk about in the book in order to be a better consumer of the research that comes from that kind of intelligence, the intelligence world.
That's fascinating. You actually have a few suggestions about how people can go about finding their own consultants or specialists. I'll leave that for those that are going to go and buy the book and read it. Listen, Marko, it's been a real pleasure. I'm not going to let you off, though, without you answering my typical 3 questions that I ask everybody. Oh, actually, before we do that, I did actually want to ask you about one thing in the book. And you tell a story in there about visiting a big client, and it was your last client that you ever visited. I was wondering if you'd be so kind to either tell that story or another story of equal kind of grandeur.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite stories. So before I jumped to the buy side, went to Clock Tower Group. I did one final round of clients, and I went up to the northeast of the U.S., Connecticut, met with a hedge fund manager, and I walked in, and I had this really cool trade on. I wanted to be long Mexican peso relative to the real, and this is late 2018. So we've already had the election in both countries, and you've got Bolsonaro in Brazil, and you've got AMLO in Mexico. And so, and one of the reasons for that is that I felt that this is a great example of geopolitical alpha, which is the title of the book. When you're making these bets based on politics, you're not really trying to predict what's going to happen. You're trying to bet the spread that the market has priced. So you can think of Mexico and Brazil of like New England and like New England Patriots versus the Buffalo Bills. The market is basically saying New England is going to win by 2 touchdowns. And you're like, the Bills are not that bad. They're still going to lose. But I'm going to bet against that spread. And so it's not that I thought AMLO was good for Mexico and Bolsonaro was bad for Brazil necessarily, but I looked at basically the markets at the moment. And you had, for the first time since I think I could legally drink, you had positive carry on the real, on the peso relative to the real at the moment in the late 2018. I was saying, like, well, look, that's a really favorable position. I want to be long the Mexican peso. I think that the market is basically saying that Bolsonaro will beat AMLO by 2 touchdowns, and I don't think that's going to happen. So I walk into an office, and I make that pitch, and the hedge fund manager, who's a legend, by the way, goes red in the face and basically says, "You're telling me I should be long communism, short capitalism. You're an idiot." And I'm like, yeah, like that's what I'm saying. That's basically what I'm saying. I don't think, and there's a lot of analysis that went behind this. This isn't just based on carry. This is also based on the fact that Mexico and the median Mexican voter is just not a communist for a number of historical reasons. Mexico actually has a really centrist, if not right of center electorate when it comes to economic issues. So you have this interesting situation where Mexico elects the first leftist president since 1920s, and he is an austerity hawk. Like he's obsessed with austerity and cutting budget deficits. And then in Brazil, the median voter is far more to the left, elected Bolsonaro, not because they wanted pro-market reforms, but because of corruption and violence. And they thought that he was going to be the law and order candidate. And then, he struggles to pursue really meaningful structural reforms. The point is the market front ran a political outcome based on some sort of a vague sense of their preferences. And the manager who basically reacted the way they did, it told me that they were really investing based on norms and morals and values and ideology. And that is a sure way to be burned. And I know a lot of people who listen to this and are sophisticated investors obviously know that. But it's really difficult to bathe yourself in indifference and to be neutral and unbiased and to focus on the constraints, because it forces you really to think about how the material reality around us is more important than our own humanity. It's a philosophical issue. It's something that you have to embrace as a political analyst when you're investing. You could argue it's very pessimistic, it's very counter-enlightenment, it's very materialistic, but ultimately that is the only way to remain centered when doing political analysis. And yes, that's the way to make a lot of money by going long communism versus capitalism.
It's such a good story, Marko. I always say, ask yourself not what you want to be done, but what will be done. And I think that you and I have very similar philosophy when it comes to that. Okay, so now on to the 3 questions. The first one being your favorite investment book of all time, apart from Geopolitical Alpha.
Well, I'm glad that you would qualify my book as an investment book, by the way. That's exactly how I would do it,
I
too.
for
It's
sure
not
consider.
geopolitical.
I could for sure think it's an investment book.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about politics, but from an investment perspective. Look, I'm going to have to give you the answer that probably like 80% of the people you've talked to have given you. It's reminiscences of a stock operator. As someone who is not naturally a trader, someone who was parachuted into finance, it was just so important in my development and just thinking about the markets and the rhythm of the markets. And what I took from that book were actually the moments when he truly became a macro investor, which happens very later when he, connects things like the Boer War, when he connects the earthquake in San Francisco, when he starts putting together like global liquidity, um, and uses it to trade on fundamentals. You can literally.
That's a fascinating way to think about it. I've never heard anyone say that, Marko. That's a really interesting thing.
I'll send you my book review.
Okay,
I'll send you my book review of that book because like what I took from the book is that he was a micro investor, a technical trader who then becomes a truly holistic trader that takes into account also macro things as well.
Could we share that with our audience? Can you send it to me?
Oh, of course,
okay,
for sure.
Terrific. So we'll include it with the show notes. That'd be terrific. Okay, your next question is, are great traders, investors born or made?
Well, that's a complicated question, Kevin, because if you're talking about traders, born.
Okay.
Absolutely. I absolutely think that. And I know that from the colleagues that I respect. There are some people there who are just born to be traders. Investors, I do think you can learn to be an investor. What's the difference between a trader and investor? I think it's the time horizon. It's the je ne sais quoi of smelling the market, really learning the rhythm of the market. I think you have to be born for that. Now, I'm not born to be a trader. I really am not. I am a great investor, I think. Okay, well, that sounded bad. Let's say, don't edit that out. Leave that in there. It's for self-flagellation reasons. But no, I think I do have a niche as an investor in more thematic and longer-term themes. That's what I'm doing at Clock Tower Group. We devise investment products based on these long-term strategic thinking that I have. But would I want to trade off of Marko Papic's 3-month or 3-week view? No. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a role in that world. And let me say what I mean by that. There is an assembly line in finance, and you have to find your part of that assembly line. Not everyone can be the shooting guard. Not everyone can be the Kobe Bryant or the Michael Jordan. You may be the point guard. You may be the shooting coach. You may be the athletic trainer. I don't know what it is, but there is a room for everyone on that assembly line. And I do know that a lot of very successful and famous and smart traders can use my insights in a way that generates alpha. But it doesn't mean that I would consider myself a trader. I would consider myself an investor.
Okay, that's a great answer. Now, the final one is, if you were to talk to somebody that was interested in entering into our, line of work, what advice would you give them?
I would give them the advice to become an expert at something before they consider themselves a macro thinker. I think macro is really cool, Kevin, and you make it really cool. I read your stuff and it's
Marko. You
it's
can
awesome.
you can admit that you're just subscribing for the pictures. I know.
I am. No, it's the Canadian wit, my friend. It's the Canadian wit that we have both drunk. But no, listen. I think what it is this. Macro is, you have no business in being in macro at the beginning of your career. You can read about it, you can be interested in it, but first become an expert at something. Because the effort and the method and the framework of acquiring a skill set so that you can call yourself an expert in something is the same path that you're going to need to then one day become a macro strategist. And ultimately, really having an impact in the world of macro comes down to this. You always know one thing really, really well. You can't have a view on everything going on in the markets. You have to pick what you know really well and then extrapolate from that into the different issues that matter for macro investing. So, for example, right now you may be a really, really high convicted that the dollar is going to go down. Then you can make, from that other assumptions. Or maybe at some other point you may say, look, Chinese policymakers are going to step on the gas. Okay, then 6 months later you're going to say the Fed is going to completely change away from inflation targeting back to orthodoxy. Whatever it is, you have to have the ability to gain conviction. So learn how to be convicted, and you can't start with macro. Now, I know a lot of young people who listen to this are going to say, well, screw that guy. I listen to Kevin's podcast so I can be, a macro expert. And all I would say is continue reading about macro, obviously continue listening to Macro Minds, but do acquire a in-depth knowledge of some part of our ecosystem. For me, it was very niche. I mean, I was an expert in European politics that then from that extrapolated to, to finance, to macro, to other regions in the world. And finally, I would call myself a macro strategist, but that took time and effort, and it took time and effort to become an expert at something. So do find a niche, make it your own, crush it, and then use it as a launch pad to become a macro strategist.
That is awesome. So, Marko, why don't you tell people about where they can find the name of your book, where they can find you, what you do at Clock Tower, and just kind of give us the whole spiel about Marko.
What we're doing at Clock Tower Group is pretty audacious. We're basically making a bet that the best way to be a macro investor is not in the public markets. It's actually to be in the private sector, in the illiquids. So what we're doing is we're thinking of illiquid alternative investment strategies that are based on macro themes. So that's my job at Clock Tower. That's my sort of a primary job, my primary big picture job. My day-to-day job is to speak to our LPs and investors about whatever it is that they're interested in, which includes a lot of public markets. That's why you and I can talk about the 10-year yield. And I'm not completely out to lunch with my view on that. So those are kind of the two jobs that I do. I also help with our hedge fund seeding, which is very exciting. I get to talk to some of the most interesting macro managers that are emerging in our ecosystem. And that's obviously a lot of fun and always humbling because you get to talk to some true just mavens, if I can use that word. Where can you find my research or what I'm writing about? Just email me. My email address is Marko with a K at clocktowergroup.com. We don't sell the research. I'm no longer on the sell side, no longer selling research, but definitely write still a lot of things. And in terms of the book, it's Geopolitical Alpha. You can really buy it anywhere. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope it adds a tool for your toolbox. It's not necessarily the most important tool. I think maybe every year there's only 4 to 6 geopolitical alpha opportunities, but I think it's a lens that simplifies what for many investors has been mysterious, opaque, and smoke-filled, almost like voodoo-like. And that's just investment-relevant, market-relevant, political and geopolitical analysis.
Well, you've converted me into a believer, Marko, because as I said, I was a skeptic that had gotten burned too many times with geopolitical analysts, and now I realize that I just looking at it under the wrong frame, and given with your book, I'm going to now look at it with the material constraints, and it'll open my eyes.
I want to hold you to it. I want to see some of this.
I will. You'll see it in my writing. You'll see it in my writing for sure.
That's what I want to see. Awesome.
Anyways, it's a real pleasure having you on, Marko. I really had a terrific time, and I thank you a lot for your book, as I really do believe that it was one of those kind of moments, aha moments for me in terms of expanding my kind of knowledge as an investor and as a trader.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a real pleasure. And I've been reading you for many, many years. And so it's just such a pleasure to finally sit down and chat with you. And I look forward to further chats.
For sure. And I look forward to someday us being in the same place and going out and getting some beers together. Maybe it'll even be in La Belle Provence. We can go out and do a little skiing or something.
That would be awesome. Okay. Like Tremblant.
That's right.
Hey,
Expo.
That's amazing.
Expo, one of the greatest runs of all time. Anyways, thanks again, absolutely. Marko. Take care.
That does it for this week's special episode, and we'll be back to our normal show format after Labor Day.
We hope all you huddlers have a great and wonderful summer. Patrick, where can they find you?
You can find me at bigpicturetrading.com or on Twitter at Patrick Ceresna. Kev, where can they find you?
On Twitter, I'm there at Kevin Muir, and you can check out my newsletter at themacrotourist.com. And listen, we can never have too many friends. Bear market, bull market. We're just happy to spend some time together on this crazy ride. So thanks for tuning in.